The warmth inside the gilded spoon was a lie, at least for Sarah Jenkins, whose feet throbbed in cheap shoes while she poured wine that cost more than her monthly rent. Outside, the Chicago wind howled like a wounded animal, throwing snow against the plate glass windows, but in here, the world was soft, golden, and terrifyingly expensive. Sarah balanced the heavy silver tray, her movements precise. She had to be perfect. The folded piece of paper in her apron pocket, a final eviction notice with 24 hours stamped in red ink, felt like it was burning through the fabric against her hip. She approached table 4. The Harrisons. Mrs. Harrison, a woman draped in silver fox fur, watched Sarah's approach with the scrutiny of a health inspector. "Your Chardonnay, ma'am," Sarah murmured, placing the crystal stemware down. Her hand, dark and roughened by 2 jobs, lingered for a fraction of a second on the white tablecloth. Mrs. Harrison pulled her elbow back sharply, as if Sarah carried a contagion. She picked up a linen napkin and ostentatiously wiped the rim of the glass Sarah had just set down. "Actually," Mrs. Harrison said, her voice a stage whisper meant to be heard, "bring me a fresh one. And perhaps do something about that hair? The braids are so distractingly urban for a place like this." Sarah froze. The glass was spotless. Her braids were neat, tight, and clean. But she didn't argue. She couldn't afford to argue. "My apologies, ma'am," she said, her voice steady, though her knuckles turned white gripping the tray. She replaced the glass. She disappeared. When the couple finally left, leaving behind the smell of expensive cigars, Sarah returned to clear the debris. She lifted the bread basket and stopped. There, centered on the pristine white linen, were 2 pennies. Not a mistake. A statement. 2 copper coins for the woman they deemed worth less than nothing. "I saw that." Mr. Bianchi's voice came from behind her, tight with anxiety. The manager wasn't looking at the insult on the table. He was glaring at Sarah. "We sell a fantasy here, Sarah. Your look, it breaks the illusion for people like them." He gestured vaguely at her hair, at her existence. "One more complaint, one more distraction, and you're done. Thanksgiving shift or not." He walked away, leaving her alone with the humiliation. Sarah scooped up the 2 pennies, the metal cold against her skin. She walked to the kitchen, leaning against the prep counter, her chest tight. She pulled out her phone, looking at the photo of baby Mia sleeping in a coat because their apartment had no heat. For her, Sarah told herself, forcing the pennies into her pocket alongside the eviction notice. Just swallow it. For her. Just then, the heavy front doors swing open, letting in a gust of freezing wind that extinguishes the candles near the entrance. The jazz music dies instantly. You could tell a lot about a man by the way a room reacted to him. When Julian Vance walked in, even the silverware seemed to stop clinking. He was a dark tear in the golden fabric of the restaurant, tall and broad, his charcoal wool coat heavy with melted snow. 2 men flanked him, thick-necked shadows whose eyes scanned the exits before they even acknowledged the host. Mr. Bianchi, the manager who had been so concerned with Sarah's braids just minutes ago, now looked like he might faint. He didn't speak, he scrambled, his hands trembling visibly as he gestured toward the secluded corner booth. The power table. The restaurant, usually a hive of low murmurs and laughter, went dead silent. Heads lowered. Eyes averted. It wasn't respect. It was the primal instinct of prey recognizing a predator. But Julian Vance didn't look like a king tonight. He looked like a man drowning. Clutched against his chest, held with the awkward stiffness of someone handling a live grenade, was a baby carrier. He sat heavily, placing the carrier on the velvet banquette. A thin, reedy whimper broke the oppressive silence. Julian stiffened. He reached in, his large hand trying to rock the plastic shell, but the motion was jerky, aggressive with anxiety. "Hush," he rasped, his voice rough like gravel grinding on glass. "Leo, stop. Please." Leo did not stop. The whimper spiraled into a wail, high-pitched and jagged. It cut through the soft jazz, through the tension, through the very air of the room. At table 4, Mrs. Harrison glared openly, tapping her manicured nails on the tablecloth, her lips pursed in irritation, but she didn't dare utter a syllable. No one did. The fear in the room was thicker than the blizzard outside. The baby's face turned a terrifying shade of violet, his little fists beating against the air, gasping for breath between screams. It wasn't just a cry. It was the sound of pure, desperate hunger. "Boss, maybe the pacifier?" One of the bodyguards ventured, reaching cautiously into a diaper bag. "I tried the damn pacifier," Julian snapped, his voice cracking. He stood up abruptly, knocking over a crystal water glass. The crash sounded like a gunshot. "He won't take it. He won't take anything." He looked around the room, wild-eyed, challenging anyone to judge him, yet terrified that he was failing the only thing that mattered. The baby was choking on sobs now, the sound agonizing. Bianchi had vanished into the kitchen. The guests were frozen statues, praying the noise would stop. While the rest of the staff retreats into the shadows, Sarah Jenkins takes a step forward, moving directly into the lion's den. Most people ran from fire. Sarah Jenkins had spent her whole life walking through it, so she didn't stop now. As she crossed the dining room floor, Mr. Bianchi lunged out from behind a pillar, grabbing her arm. His face was gray. "Are you insane?" he hissed, his nails digging into her sleeve. "He'll kill you. Get back to the kitchen." Sarah looked at the manager, then down at her pocket where the 2 cold pennies lay heavy against her hip. They were a reminder of what this world thought she was worth. But looking at the sobbing infant, she knew she possessed something that all the money in this room couldn't buy. She pulled her arm free, not with anger, but with a strange, calm authority. "Let me go," she said quietly. She stopped 2 feet from the table. The bodyguards shifted, hands moving inside their jackets. Julian Vance looked up, his eyes wild and bloodshot, like a trapped animal waiting for the final blow. "What?" he barked, the single word dripping with menace. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't look at the gun-toting men or the terrified patrons. She looked only at the baby. "He's not giving you a hard time, sir," she said, her voice cutting through the baby's screams. "He's having a hard time. And he's hungry. He won't eat." Julian shouted, desperation cracking his scary facade. "The formula. The bottle, he hates it." "He doesn't want a bottle. He wants a mother," Sarah said. She took a step closer, entering the circle of danger. "I have an 8-month-old daughter at home. I'm nursing her." The words hung in the air, heavy and intimate. Julian froze. The implication hit him like a physical blow. A waitress, a stranger, a black woman he hadn't even noticed 5 minutes ago, was offering the most personal act of charity imaginable. "If you allow me," Sarah whispered, extending her hands, "I can feed him." For a second, the only sound was the baby's ragged gasping. Julian looked at his son, turning purple with distress, and then at Sarah's steady, compassionate eyes. The wall of the Mafia Boss crumbled. He nodded, once, sharp and desperate. "Where?" he demanded, turning to Bianchi. "A room. Now." They moved to the manager's office in the back, away from the prying eyes. It was a small, cluttered space smelling of old receipts. Julian stood by the door, his back turned to give her privacy, his broad shoulders rising and falling with every breath. Sarah sat on the worn leather chair and gathered Leo into her arms. The moment he latched, the screaming cut off instantly. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy, holy. Sarah hummed a low, wordless tune, her body relaxing into the ancient rhythm of motherhood. In the corner, the terrifying crime boss slumped against the doorframe, listening to the soft sounds of his son finding peace, and buried his face in his hands. It was the first time in months the baby had been silent. Sarah adjusted her dress and stood up, the baby now heavy and limp with milk-drunk sleep. She walked over to Julian and tapped him gently on the elbow. He turned around slowly. His eyes were red. He stared at the miracle in her arms, his son, peaceful, safe, fed. He reached out, taking Leo back with a tenderness that seemed impossible for a man of his reputation. Sarah hands the sleeping, satisfied baby back to Julian. He looks at her, really looks at her, and whispers a question that changes everything. "Who are you?" The stack of cash on the mahogany desk was thick enough to choke a horse, but Sarah Jenkins looked at it like it was dirty laundry. Julian Vance had pulled the roll from his jacket pocket the moment Leo fell asleep, counting out $100 bills with the casual indifference of a man who owned the mint. "5,000, he said, pushing the pile across the scarred wood of the manager's desk. "For your trouble." For the service. Sarah stared at the money. It was more than 3 months of double shifts. It was the rent, the heating bill, and new winter coats for Mia and herself. It was salvation. But the way he offered it like payment for a magic trick, like hush money, made her stomach turn. She reached into her pocket, fingering the sharp corner of the eviction notice, and then she looked him in the eye. "I fed a hungry baby, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice quiet but steel hard. "I didn't perform a circus act. Keep your money." She turned to leave, her hand on the doorknob. Wait. Julian's voice wasn't a bark this time. It was stunned. He was used to people begging, taking, stealing. He wasn't used to no. He looked at the sleeping baby in the carrier, then back at the woman in the stained apron, who had just refused a fortune. "Then let me pay you differently," he said, stepping around the desk. "My son, he hasn't slept like that in 6 months. Since my wife died." He took a breath, the vulnerability flashing across his face before the mask slammed back down. "I need a nanny. Someone who isn't afraid of me. Someone he responds to. 50,000 a year. Live-in. Full benefits. Use of the car." Sarah stopped. The room went silent, save for the hum of the wine fridge. 50,000. That wasn't just money. That was a life. That was a future where Mia didn't have to sleep in a coat. She turned back slowly. "I have a daughter," she said. "She comes with me. And I know who you are, Mr. Vance. I know what people say. If I do this, I see nothing. I hear nothing. I am there for the baby, not for your business. The moment I feel unsafe, I'm gone." Julian nodded slowly, a flicker of respect lighting his dark eyes. "Done," he said. "Be ready tomorrow." Sarah walked out of the office and back onto the restaurant floor to grab her coat. The silence returned, but this time it was different. Table 4 was still there. The Harrisons were staring, their mouths slightly open. They watched as Mr. Bianchi, the manager who had threatened to fire her an hour ago, rushed forward to hold the door open for her, bowing slightly like she was visiting royalty. Sarah didn't look at the floor. She didn't look at the 2 pennies still sitting on the table. She walked out into the snow with her head high. Later that night, in her freezing apartment, Sarah zipped up a battered suitcase. She picked up a small, framed photo from the nightstand, a picture of her late mother smiling in church. Sarah packed her bags in her crumbling apartment, looking at a faded photo of her mother. "We're going to the Lion's Den, Mama. Pray for us." Julian Vance's mansion in Lake Forest was a palace of marble and gold, cold enough to freeze milk before it even hit the glass. Sarah stood in the foyer, holding Mia tight against her chest, feeling small in the cavernous space. The house smelled of lemon polish and silence. It was beautiful. Yes, like a mausoleum is beautiful. At the top of the sweeping staircase stood Lucia Vance, Julian's mother. She was a woman carved from granite, dressed in severe black, her silver hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She descended slowly, her eyes fixing not on Sarah, but on the baby girl in Sarah's arms. "So," Lucia said, her voice echoing off the stone walls, "this is the miracle worker my son hired. A stranger. And you brought baggage." Sarah tightened her grip on Mia. "My daughter," Sarah corrected, her voice echoing slightly. "Her name is Mia. And I'm Sarah." Lucia sniffed, a sound of pure dismissal. "I raised 3 boys without help, and certainly without dragging other children into my employer's home. But Vincent Julian, as he calls himself now, is soft. He thinks money fixes everything." She stopped on the bottom step, towering over Sarah. "Make no mistake. You are here because he is desperate, not because you belong here. The nursery is on the 2nd floor. Do not touch the artifacts in the hall." Sarah didn't reply. She walked past the older woman, carrying her daughter and her dignity up the stairs. The nursery was worse than the foyer. It was pristine, decorated in white and pale gray, filled with expensive toys that were still in their boxes. It looked like a showroom, sterile and lifeless. Sarah set Mia down in the portable crib she had brought and went to the main crib where Leo was starting to fuss. The moment she picked him up, Lucia appeared in the doorway. "Put him down," the older woman commanded. "He is just seeking attention. In my day, we let them cry it out. It builds character." Leo's fussing turned into a wail. Sarah felt the baby's body tense up. He was stressed, lonely, grieving. He's 6 months old, ma'am, Sarah said, not putting him down. He doesn't need character. He needs to know he hasn't been abandoned. Do not lecture me on raising children, Lucia snapped, stepping forward. I am his grandmother. Then hold him, Sarah offered, extending the crying baby. Hold him like you love him, not like you're inspecting him. Lucia flinched, stepping back. The baby screamed louder. Sarah pulled Leo back to her chest, rocking into that familiar rhythm, and began to hum the low, throaty lullaby she had used in the restaurant. The effect was instant. Leo's back relaxed. His breathing slowed. The screams cut off as if a switch had been flipped. In the sudden silence of the nursery, Sarah looked at the grandmother. He doesn't need discipline, ma'am. He just lost his mother. He needs to know he's not alone. Lucia stared at the sleeping child, then at Sarah's calm, dark face. For a moment, the granite facade cracked. She looked old, tired, and incredibly sad. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to apologize, or perhaps to scold, but the sound of the front door slamming downstairs made them both jump. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. Julian appeared in the doorway, his coat covered in fresh snow, his face pale and wild. He didn't look at his mother. He looked straight at Sarah. Cancel Thanksgiving dinner, he said, breathless. It's not safe. I have to go deal with something. They didn't run, and they didn't cancel dinner. Sarah Jenkins put the turkey in the oven and said, Nobody ruins Thanksgiving on my watch. She stood in the kitchen doorway, wearing an apron over her dress, blocking Julian's path to the garage. He was pacing, his phone clutched in his hand like a weapon, vibrating with messages from a world of violence. You don't understand, he told her, his voice tight. If I don't go deal with this, rival, it looks like weakness. Walking out on your son's first Thanksgiving without his mother, Sarah said calmly, that is weakness. Staying here, being a father, that is strength. She took the phone from his unresisting hand. She didn't look at the screen. She opened the kitchen drawer, the one usually reserved for junk mail, and dropped the device inside. She slid it shut with a definitive thud. Wash your hands, Mr. Vance. It's time to carve the bird. 2 hours later, the dining room was unrecognizable. The long, cold mahogany table was set not for a banquet of ghosts, but for a family. There were candles, mismatched because Sarah had let Mia play with them, and the air smelled rich with roasted sage, butter, and sweet pumpkin. Julian sat at the head of the table, not in a suit, but in a sweater. He looked at the spread the turkey Sarah had seasoned, the cranberry sauce from a can, because that's how real families ate it, and the two babies in high chairs smearing mashed potatoes on their faces. He stood up to make a toast, raising his wine glass. He looked at his mother, Lucia, whose face had softened in the candlelight. He looked at Leo, laughing as Mia threw a pea at him. And finally, he looked at Sarah. He opened his mouth to speak, the rehearsed words of a boss ready on his tongue, but nothing came out. His throat worked. His eyes filled. And then, the man who made Chicago tremble broke down. He didn't sob loudly. He just wept, silent, grateful tears streaming down his face. I was drowning, he whispered, his voice thick. I was in the dark, and I thought that was all there was left. Until a stranger walked through the fire to save my son. He looked at Sarah, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. You didn't just feed a baby, Sarah. You saved us. Thank you. The room was silent, but it wasn't the terrified silence of the restaurant. It was the silence of peace. Then, movement came from the other end of the table. Lucia, the woman who had called Sarah a stranger and baggage just yesterday, reached out her hand across the white tablecloth. Her pale, manicured fingers waited. Sarah hesitated for a heartbeat, then reached out. Her dark, work-worn hand clasped Lucia's. The grip was firm, warm. Sarah, Lucia said softly, her eyes wet. Will you say grace for us? Sarah bowed her head. Bless this food, she began, her voice steady and strong. And bless this family found and forged. The camera pans out from the warm, lit window into the snowy night. Inside, they are safe. A new family has begun. Sometimes, the strongest bridges are built not with steel, but with a single act of gentleness. Sarah and Julian showed us that when we choose to look past the surface, past the color of skin, the rumors, or the mistakes of yesterday, we often find the family we didn't know we were missing. So tonight, hold your loved ones a little closer and remember, even in the coldest winter, a little kindness is enough to light the way home.